Namaste. Vakratunda Mahakaya Suryakoti Samaprabha Nirvignam Kurme Deva Sarvakaryeshu Sarvada. Gurur Brahma Gurur Vishnu Guru Devo Maheshwaraha Guru Sakshat Parabrahma Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. We seek the blessings of Adi Guru, our Pujya Gurus, and Guru Parampara. Team Param Vedanta welcomes you all. Namaste. This is the 9th session of Pancadashi, chapter 7. In spite of the knowledge of Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya Jiva Brahmaiva Naparaha, we behave quite otherwise. Often everyone around us continues to be harassed and asks us questions. What's the point of your Vedanta if you can't behave like, improve yourself? We continue to harbor on the idea that I am this body-mind complex and the world is real. My problems are real. These notions are deeply entrenched in us and they're instinctive. Today, the team will speak in detail on how to remove these obstacles of erroneous thinking. This erroneous thinking is termed as Viprita Bhavana, and the speakers will also talk on different ways of doing Brahma Abhasa or Nididhyasana to overcome these obstacles. We begin today's session with a recap of last week's session by Dr. Ravi Shankar. We will also have one verse, my favorite Gita verse by Dr. Ashwini Kumar in the end. Over to you, Dr. Ravi Shankar.
Sri Gurubhyo Namaha. Mahavakya Vichara gives Paroksha Jnana is what Vachaspati Mishra would always say. And this has been clearly refuted by Swami Vidyaranya, who says that Mahavakya Vichara actually gives Aparoksha Jnana, and if you don't have that, continue Shravana. Otherwise, this is like losing the capital investment and the interest as seen in a Laukika Vyavahara. In the next set of two verses, the Purva Pakshi comments that the mind and the Antakarna as an Upadhi reveals Jiva Aparoksha. And we know that Brahman is Nirupadhika. So you can have Jiva Aparoksha Jnana, but how can you have Brahma Aparoksha Jnana? And Swami Vidyaranya goes to explain that Upadhi Abhava, absence of an Upadhi itself is an Upadhi for Brahman. In the Paramarthika Drishti, there is no Upadhi. But in the Vyavaharika Drishti, Upadhi for Brahman is available in the Vyavaharika Avastha. Therefore, Nirguna, which means absence of gunas, becomes an Upadhi of Brahman in Vyavaharika Drishti. The next set of two verses, the Purva Pakshi asks a question. If Brahman is free of Upadhi, what is that in Brahman which liberates me? And Swami Vidyaranya says that the presence of mind is the Upadhi of Brahman, by which Brahman becomes Jiva Chaitanya. And the absence of mind is the Upadhi for Chaitanya, which makes it Brahma Chaitanya. How can Chaitanya have the status of Brahman because of the Antakarna Abhava as the Upadhi is the question posed. And Swami Vidyaranya says, look, this Upadhi is what helps you to identify something. It's a method of communication, whether it is positive or negative. The chain status remains the same, whether the chain is a gold chain or an iron chain is what he explains. In the next set of two verses, Swami Vidyaranya continues to explain the same using the Vakya Vritti Shloka 28 of Bhagavad Pada Adi Shankaracharya and says that the negative upadhis could be Nisheda Mukha Pramana or the Neti Neti Iti Atma, or it could be the Prancha Upashamana, and the positive types could be the Vidimukha Pramana, Satyam Jnanam, or Vijnanam Anandam Brahma, or Satchitanand. A question comes. What should I do to know Aham Brahmasmi? Give up Jiva Bhava, have Brahma Bhava. And Purva Pakshi then says, if you exclude the mind, how can you ever get this word Aham? Where does that word aham come if you exclude the mind? Swami Vidyaranya says there are three components: the mind, the chidbhasa, the chidabhasa or the reflected consciousness, and chit. I am entitled to use aham by using the bhaga tyaga lakshana. In the next set of two verses, we understand further that Paramarthika Chaitanya and the mind cannot be included in me at all the periods of time. This understanding is extremely important for exclusion of the mind, which means I become mindless even though I use the mind. So the mithya mind presence and the mithya mind absence do not make any difference to me. Negate the mind as mithya, I claim Satya Chaitanya as Aham Brahmasmi. Vritti Vyapti plays a role in the case of Brahma Chaitanya. Chidabhasa, the reflected consciousness, need not illumine Brahman because Brahman is self-illumined original consciousness. We move to the next set of two verses to further understand that the pot knowledge, both the thought and the reflected consciousness, pervades and illumines the pot. Chaitanya has to pervade to illumine that pot, and that avarana of ignorance is eliminated by the thoughts. Swami Vidyaranya says, the very thought of Aham Brahmasmi is needed and is enough to remove Brahma Ajnana. Chidabhasa or Phala Vyapti is not utilized because Brahman is not like a pot and Brahman is self-effulgent. We further move to see this example. The pot needs knowledge as the eye compared to the thought and Deepa as the Chidabhasa. But to see the light, Deepa Darshane, there is no need for a thought. I is enough alone. Exactly in the same way, Brahma Jnana as a vritti alone is enough. The Chidabhasa will never add to the brightness of the original Chit or consciousness. It actually merges into Chit. In the next two verses, we notice that the question arises, the mind cannot know Brahman and the mind alone knows Brahman. How is that? So this Brahman is known without the help of the reflected consciousness. Reflected consciousness has a role to play only as a Phala Vyapti. And Swami Vidyaranya explains how aparoksha jnana aham brahmasmi arises in the mind of a shishya only when they do a proper mahavakya vichara under the guidance of an able acharya. In aparoksha jnana, the person specifies Brahman not as an object somewhere far away, but the Jnani says, Aham Brahmasmi, I myself am Brahman. I am responsible for this Jagat Karana Brahma. Specifying Brahma as I is the Aparoksha Jnana. We further move to see that Mahavakya Vichara is therefore capable of giving Aparoksha Jnana. Swami Vidyaranya explains in the next set of verses from the 97th shloka that there is a gap between the Jnana Prapti and the Jnana Phala Prapti. And the Jnana Prapti is by the first Shravana. The gap is removed by the removal of Pratibandhas, Pratibandha Nivritti, by the second Shravana, Manana and Nididhyasana. And the Pratibandhas are the Pramana Asambhavana, Prameya Asambhavana, and the Viparita Bhavana, which have been very well explained in the previous sessions. So Jnana should become Apratibandha Jnana. We have to continue with Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, continuing Sadhana Chatushtaya Sampatti. In the next set of three verses, we realize, that Shruti Vakya Virodha now becomes Pratyaksha Virodha. Resolve them only through Shravana. And these habitual misconceptions which continue about me and my world are because of habits which die hard. After studying Karma Kanda, there is a lot of misconception because they continue to have the same kind of misconceptions in the Jnana Kanda, saying that the teachings are different. This doubt is eliminated through Shravana of the Upanishads because all the Upanishads reveal the same teaching of Jivatma Paramatma Aikya. It teaches Jivatma Paramatma Aikya alone. That is what Vyasacharya attempts in Brahma Sutra. And to develop this conviction of Jivatma Paramatma Aikya is the process through Shravana. Hari Om, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ravi Shankar. This was absolutely brilliant. in a matter of very few minutes, you were able to give the essence of about or even more than 30 verses of Tripti Deepa, which is a great accomplishment. This is possible only if it is very clearly internalized. And this recap is going to be a great treasure for all those who have studied the verses of the last class. And that is why I also encourage all those of our students who play the role of teachers to take this opportunity to do the recap. Because once you do the recap, the understanding that you get, I'm certain Dr. Ravi Shankar has taken hours to make this kind of a presentation, but this is, you know, whenever the Purva Pakshi asks pertinent questions, it questions your Tattva Bodha knowledge, your fundamentals of Vedanta. And if the fundamentals of Vedanta are very clear, you are able to have a better understanding of Vedanta. Sadashiva Samarambam Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Pariyantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om Namah Shri Shankarananda Guru Padambu Janmane Savikara Mahamoha Graha Graseka Karmane Atmanam Ched Vijaniyat Ayam Asmiti Purushaha Kimbichan Kasya Kamaya Shariram Anuswam Jware. Let us re-look at our spiritual journey. Because we have come to another very crucial point as we have studied about 100 verses of the Tripti Deepa. We all know about Purushartha, Dharma, Artha, Kama, and the Parama Purushartha as Moksha. A certain stage of our life came when we shifted from being religious to being spiritual. That is when we came to a guru, and verses like this became very clear. Pariksha Lokan Karmachitan Brahmana. That means from now on, God is no more a means. God is no more a service provider. Until now, whenever I had difficulties, I would go to the temple, I would do puja because I was a religious person. And God was there always to support me in all my needs. But once a person has evaluated a life, this is what is called Pariksha Lokan, and seen the futility of Dharma, Artha, Kama, now the teacher now directs us to something, instead of God being the means and service provider and the world and all the comforts of the world being my goal, the shift is now, I want to know about God. And this is possible only by a person who knows God. Such a person is called a Shrotriya Brahmanishta, one who has the ability to communicate, one who is anchored, and then to such a guru, tad vignartam sa gurumeva abhikachet. I go with my samit pani as that I'm ready to surrender my past. Once we enter the guru, then the guru gives us a clear roadmap. And what is the roadmap? He says, he gives us Jivan Mukti or moksha as a temporary goal. He will not tell us it is a temporary goal. He says, let your mission be to be a mukta purusha. That means while you are in this body, I want you to be free. This is possible only through spiritual knowledge. And spiritual knowledge is possible only for a person who is eligible. And therefore, the teacher will introduce to you certain sadhanas like karma yoga, upasana yoga, shravanam, mananam, and so on. And this is how we have been there for a long time. And now we need to see we are no longer beginner students of Vedanta. We need to clearly see ourselves as advanced students of Vedanta. And when we are advanced students of Vedanta, suddenly the teacher will give us a certain shift. Until now, the teacher was not confident to say this to us, that moksha is no longer a sadhyam or a goal. Moksha is a siddha vastu. The teacher will say there is no corridor that connects the finite to the infinite. You want to become Purna, you want to become Ananta, you want to become limitless. Any amount of sadhana will never transform the limited to the limitless. So what do? Swami Paramarthananda emphasizes this again and again, that moksha is a nitya vastu. It has been there all the time. It is a siddha vastu. It is something that you are born with, but for various reasons, we are not able to realize that. Now, when we come to the study of the Tripti Deepa through the 10th man story, when we get aparoksha jnanam of Brahma Vidya, this is the conversion that we need to see. Previously, I would say, I have only knowledge and I am not yet liberated. Now that we have this knowledge, and again through the 10th man example, I have to say, I have Brahma Vidya and therefore I am free. I am liberated. What a jump. Now, therefore, what is moksha? Is it some extraordinary experience that happens on a certain red letter day? Swamiji repeatedly says moksha is not an extraordinary experience. It is an intellectual phenomenon. Somehow the brain has got that message, Aham Brahma Asmi. And as I said, it is not just getting worldly knowledge. It has come through the inquiry, just like the teacher makes you count all the 9, and then the one that you're looking for, you discover, even before the teacher says that the 10th man is me. That liberation can be discovered only through self-knowledge. So now we have got this truth, and this is what we need to meditate on, and that is the stage of Tripti Deepa that we have come to. Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya Jivo Brahmaiva Napara. That means from now on, Tat Chintam, Tat Kathanam, Anyon Tat Prabodhanam. Whatever activity I do, it should be confined to this message only. Brahma Satyam, Jagan Mithya, Jivo Brahmaiva Naparaha. And this has to become a matter of conviction. Now we have to remember this in and through Vyavahara. If I forget this, then what happens? I claim my body to be myself, and the world becomes real. So from now on, especially through these most beautiful verses that we are going to study in today's class, our sadhana is to make my jnanam a nishta. Aham Brahmasmi has to be strengthened, and Jagan Mithya has to be weakened. You will remember that all of us had a dream at one time, to have a dream job, to have dream money, to have a dream spouse, to have dream children. Now Vedanta will say all your dreams have come true, because everything that you have is a dream. You have a dream spouse, you have a dream children, you have dream money, you have a dream profession. Now that is what is meant by Jagan Mithya. Whatever you experience is not as real. And therefore, the next big jump, in fact, Swamiji tells us again and again, more than Brahma Satyam, it is Jagan Mithya that we need to work on. Otherwise, we remain where we are. I'll conclude this presentation with one of the most brilliant wisdom that we have got from Swamiji, that we need to remember when we are doing this process of Nididhyasanam. I am of the nature of eternal and all-pervading consciousness. That means I am Nityaha, Shuddhaha, Buddhaha, Muktaha, Shivoham, Shivoham, Shiva Swarupaha. Meditate on this first point. Second, and very important, I am the only source of permanent peace, security, and happiness. Any other happiness that I get from any person, object, or situation is a reflection of my own glory, my own happiness. Third, and very important, is by my mere presence, I give life to this material body. And through this material body, I experience this material universe. If you want to go ahead, one more step, Mayeva Sakalam Jatam, my Sarvam Pratishtitam. By my mere presence, I enliven this body and I give existence to this world. I sustain this world, and this world resolves into me. Be very clear in your declaration. Mayeva Sakalam Jatam, my Sarvam Pratishtitam, my Sarvam Layam Yati, Tad Brahmadvayam Asmayam Aham. Swamiji says when you say these statements, there should not be an iota of flinch, because you have to say that with a matter of conviction. Very importantly, this comes from your dream family, your dream possessions, and so on. I'm not affected by anything that happens to this material world, this material body, and so on. Therefore, asangoham, 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 punah punaha. Why? I am Satchidananda Rupa Swarupa. By forgetting my true nature, I convert this life into a samsara. By remembering this, I convert my life into a leela or a sport. In one of your future classes will come this beautiful story. Even before this story comes, I want you to meditate on this story. Let this story be a reflection of our life, not of our life in the spiritual class, but when we are into the world outside. There were two people who were on a yatra, who were on a very difficult yatra, and the yatra never seemed to be ending. It was going on and on and on. And because of the certain difficulty in the yatra, both of them were absolutely tired, absolutely exhausted. Now, I want you to identify with one person whom I will call as Janan. Between the two, there is one person, and I will call him Janan. Janan means he knows. Janan knows what? The end is near. One of the two, that is you, that is each one of us who have now advanced students of Vedanta, know that I am reaching the end. My goal is very near. I have struggled, I'm tired, but the very fact that I can feel that the end is very near, there is a real amount of enthusiasm that keeps you going. The other person has no idea. Janan, he's Ajnani. He's so tired. He's cursing what Prarabdha is giving him, and he gives up. This is what Swami Anubhavananda tells us again and again. Our spiritual journey is over. There is nothing more to do. There is nowhere to go. Swamiji says, let this be our clear understanding. Other than this clear understanding, nothing else is required. With this background, let us look into verses of today's class, and the opening speaker will be Dr. Sundar. Dr. Sundar, please.
Hari Om, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. This text started with a profound verse as said by sage Yajnavalkya. And the first line, as we have seen several times, showed us what is Jnanam, Atma Jnanam. And the second line gave us what is the Phalam. So Pujya Vidyaranya Swamiji takes up word by word to explain this over several verses. We have seen the word Purusha having been covered initially, and a large number of verses to explain how Atma can be seen as first person singular, where the 7 stages of the 10th man story and the Mahavakya Vichara were covered. And then we have seen a short analysis on Pramana Vichara by using Bhagatyaga Lakshana. Now we come to the next set in this text, which as we shall see in this next slide, is that after Mahavakya Vichara, there is no doubt that all of us have Jnanam, but I still seem to not benefit from that Jnanam, and life seems to be similar like it was before. So there seems to be some block between Jnanam and the Jnana Phalam. One wonders whether I have the knowledge at all, although it is there after such detailed study. One may also question whether this knowledge actually has the power to give me the Phalam. So Swami Vidyaranya says that the problem is not actually with Jnanam, but the problem is with each of our minds. Pujya Swami Paramarthananda ji says that there is Antakarana dosha, not one, but 3 of them are there. So the first Antakarana dosha is Pramana Asambhavana. Tatparyam, the central message, is not clearly understood. I superficially dwell in the scriptures and I see Jivatma is there, Paramatma is there. There are book covers which show two birds, one Jivatma and one Paramatma. Are there two of them or is it one of them? So such doubts are there. Even though I have faith in the scriptures, my understanding is not clear. So Tatparyam, the central message, which is non-duality, doesn't come out. And in the foregone verses, it has been shown that the solution for this Antakarana dosha, the first one, is Shravanam. Pujya Swamiji has defined Shravanam as continuous and systematic study of scriptures under a qualified guru for a length of time. So it is not a crash course. It is a clear understanding in a stepwise manner. We were also told that this is the topic, subject matter of the first chapter of Brahma Sutra, Samanvaya Adhyaya. The second Antakarana dosha that prevents me to reap the benefits of Jnanam is titled Prameya Asambhavana. We are under the influence of two powerful torches, instruments available to us. One is the Pratyaksha Pramana and the second is the Shastra Pramana. Pratyaksha Pramana repeatedly shows to me that there is a pluralistic world outside. It shows to me Dvaitam. But Shastra repeatedly says that there is Advaitam. This is the second Antakarana dosha. And this goes away with Manana, which is covered in the second chapter of Brahma Sutra as Avirodha Adhyaya. In short, the scriptures do not contradict the Pratyaksha Pramana about duality in Vyavaharika plane. So in the Vyavaharika plane, we can accept duality. But what is to be understood is in the Paramarthika plane, there is no role for the Pratyaksha Pramana at all. Just as the sense organ of smell has no role in the field of vision. So Paramarthika Drishti, there is Advaita, although in the Vyavaharika Drishti, there may be Dvaita. Now we come to the present set of verses which deal with the third Antakarana dosha, which is Viparita Bhavana. These are powerful tendencies formed over innumerable lifetime. What are these tendencies? Let us see in this next slide. Bahujanma dhridabhyasad dehadishu atmadehi kshanat punah punah udeti evam jagat satyatva dhi api. So atmadihu dehadishu udeti. The notion of the self is that I am this body. Such notion, udeti, arises kshanat, instantly, punah punah, again and again. So we have crossed over that portions of the text which said with such conviction that I am of the nature of Atma Chaitanyam. But in this verse, we can see that again and again, instantly, I identify with my body-mind complex. Why? Bahujanma drabhyasad, due to a firm habitual attachment to the body-mind complex. This verse also talks about another wrong notion, which is given in the later part of the second line. Evam, in this same manner, there is a wrong notion with regarding to the reality of the world. Jagat Satyatva Dhi Api, the notion that this world is real. This false notion also I am attached to. The reason is the same, that during many past lives, I have actually done Nididhyasanam, that I am this body. I have done Nididhyasanam, that I am this mind. This habitual false identification with the body-mind complex doesn't easily go away, even though I have covered about 100 verses of this text. So how to solve this? This is given in this next verse, as we see in this next slide. Iyam viparita bhavana asti. So in the first part of the first line, Pujya Swami Vidyaranya is defining this habitual notion as Viparita Bhavana. Yam Viparita Bhavana Asti. And in the second part of the first line, Sa refers to the same Viparita Bhavana. Sa Nivartate. Such habitual notion can be removed. How? So in this verse, Swamiji uses the word Ekagrayat. From single pointedness, such habitual erroneous thinking will go. Normally, we have seen in the introduction to the Vedanta classes as well as in the Bhagavad Gita that the solution for repeated habitual attachment to the body-mind complex is nididhyasanam, that I am of the nature of Atma Chaitanyam. However, Swamiji, instead of using the word nididhyasanam, is using the word Aikagriyat, that is through single pointedness. So this we have to reconcile with our previous understanding by the explanation given by Pujya Swami Paramarthananda ji that the process of nididhyasanam, that I am this body, I am not this body mind, but this I am this Atma Chaitanyam, is actually a form of control over my thought. So as we see in this second line, etad, that this ekagriyat, this way of single pointedness, bhavati tattvopadeshat prageva. So Swami Vidyaranya is pointing out that this form of thought control has happened earlier itself in the stage of upasana yoga. So we have seen that for jnana yogyata, I need sadhana chatushtaya sampatti. One component of the sadhana chatushtaya sampatti is samadhi shatka sampatti. And a component there within is samadhana or chitta ekagrata. So we have seen in the upasana yoga stage itself that thought control is important. So what Pujya Swami Vidyaranya is saying is that a similar form of concentration, but the subject matter now at the end of Vedantic study is not the samadhana at that point where you are doing saguna upasana, but you are repeatedly encouraging this thought that my true nature is one of Atma Chaitanyam. It is not of body-mind complex. So perpetuation of the idea that Brahman alone is Satyam and Jagat is Mithya. So the solution for the Viparita Bhavana is Nididhyasanam. In this next slide, we can conclude by saying what Adi Shankaracharya advocated for this problem of Antakarana dosha, that one has to stick to repeated Shravana Manan Nididhyasana, one has to be diligent in satsanga, and we need to do this till the knowledge is firmly rooted, not just as our second nature, but as our only true nature. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sundar. This was an absolutely clear and wonderful explanation of these two verses, where it was very clearly pointed out, even though we have Brahma Jnanam, we can suddenly fall from Paramarthika state to Vyavahara at the slightest of provocation, because we forget that reality, we take ourselves to be the body, and we take the world to be real. We have got the solution in the next verse. And what is the solution? The solution is that those of us who are good upasakas, that means who have been doing a lot of upasana in the past, now it becomes very easy for them to do nididhyasana because the mind is already primed. Now, does it mean that we now have to become upasakas? Swamiji says certainly no, because the moment you go to upasana, there is a dvaita that comes, and we strengthen the dvaita bhag. From now onwards, let our focus be what we will hear next on tat chintanam, tat kathanam, anyon, tat prabodhanam, rather than going back to upasaka, although that has helped us to be able to understand these verses. I will keep the discussion a little later because all the talks until now have been so perfect. We will go to the next speaker, that is Ullas, and I will tell you when we can open up for discussion. Ullas, please.
Thank you, sir. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. So I think what we are going to discuss now is going to be a whole lot of repetition, because the whole 7th chapter is about making the paroksha jnana to aparoksha jnana. This is for this text is for senior students, advanced students, in which the assumption is that we already kind of have the paroksha jnana, in which we are already told that a rasgulla is very sweet. But we can have that knowledge in our books or in our heads, but until and unless we have that rasgulla ourselves, we will not really know what that sweetness of rasgulla is. So we need to make that jnana my own. We have to make that aparoksha, in which I don't really need any extra instrument of knowledge. I just know it by myself. Because the problem that we face in our lives is not lack of knowledge, honestly, because for until now we have already learned so many times, we have read so much of text. Swamiji has been really pounding this into us that I am that Brahman. So bookishly we kind of know that, but still we don't get that jnana phala. What is the jnana phala? That we don't really see any worldly problems, or our FIR is really reduced. Those things are not at that level where we expect them to be. And as Neeta initially said, that people still say that, well, what is the point of all this knowledge if you are still behaving this way or that way? So the jnana phala is not really coming into us. So the problem is not jnana. There is some kind of a roadblock, or there are certain obstacles that are coming between our jnana and jnana phala, because that jnana is actually not that very dridha in us. That nishtha is not there. It's not very firmly established. So we need to see what we can do. I think the whole 7th chapter is about what can we do to make that firmly established in ourselves. We can have sacks of sugar in our household, but if we don't put it in the tea and stir it properly, the tea is not going to get sweetened. So this whole exercise is like, how do we put in there and we stir it? Right now we have this jnana as a vritti in our minds. So the idea is not to strengthen that vritti anymore, but there is like obstacles, there are pratibandhas on top of that. We need to remove those layer by layer, layer by layer. The jnana is already there. Swamiji gives example of like there is a tube light. It's already lit, but there is a black cloth, or there are layers of 2-3 black cloths on it. So we need to remove those black cloths. The tube light is fine. Like there is a dust on the mirror. Mirror is fine. We need to remove that dust. Multiple examples to just point out that we need to remove these pratibandhas. For example, but what happens is that when problems come, then our whole jnana goes out of the window, and then we fall back to our original things, because again we don't have that nishtha in that. For example, when sunrise and sunset happens, we see that actually the sun, our experience is that the sun is moving, but internally we really know, we have that nishtha that no, earth is going around the sun. So even though we don't keep saying this all the time that okay, no, earth is going around, earth is going around, we say okay, sun is going up, sun is going down. So in transactional things we do say that, but in the back of our minds we are 100% certain that it is earth that is going around. So we need to have that firm establishment that really this jnana, I am that Brahman, that has to be established. And once that is there, then we can continue with our regular vyavaharik things. So now in the next slide we see, as sir was saying, that tat chintanam tat kathanam anyonyam. Anyonya means not other than me, it is just me. We need to have that think that this Brahman is, while I am doing any activity, whether I'm doing chintanam, I'm doing kathanam, I'm talking to somebody, I'm interacting with somebody, in every experience, I need to have this bhavana that I am that Brahman. Actually, in this, Swamiji, technically speaking, talks about two ways in which how we can achieve that. Is one is already discussed in Yoga Vasishta, in which it is, and Yoga Shastra also, Patanjali Yoga, Samadhi Abhyasa Rupa. We can sit in a particular place at a particular time in a particular asana, and when we can do that upasana, but then again falls into kind of karma kanda, but we can still do that. The other one, which is Mano Nigraha, also talked about in Upanishads, is what we need to do is we need to dwell on this teaching that I am that Kutastha, unchanging, limitless Brahman. Once we keep on dwelling on that in every experience, in every task, every time when we do that, that is going in our mind, then that is the only way it can become dridha. Then only we will have this nishtha in our mind. So that Brahma Abhyasa. In the next slide, we see that Swamiji says that right now what is happening is that we have our mind, and then there is a teaching in some compartment in which our mind says, okay, Swamiji says that I am that Brahman, but I still feel that perhaps am I really that Brahman or not? the idea is that we need to make both the mind and then teaching as one, that there is no such doubt ever remains that is it there, is it not there. So we need to actually we need to upgrade ourselves from like a sadhaka to a siddha, and there is no amount of karma that can make that happen. It is just a thought reorientation. It is just a change of attitude, that we need to understand that I am that lost prince, I am that 10th man. So that is what is needed. And so Brahma Abhyasa method is like we every day dwell on this teaching. And so for that, there are multiple steps which are talked about. For example, initially we can start with Ekarupa Upasana, in which I am now trying to concentrate my mind. Then I go to Vishwarupa Upasana, when I'm expanding my mind, because God cannot be limited in a particular shape or form. But then Vishwarupa also has so many attributes. Then I go into Akasharupa meditation, in which now I do Nirguna Upasana. And that way, slowly and slowly, using this as a stepping stone of Upasana, we can become very easily, we can dwell on this teaching. Choose any method, idea is to dwell on the teaching that I am that limitless Brahman. So in the next slide, we see there are multiple other verses that fall in between. Our next verse is that Atma Jnana we have, but what is more important now for at our level is to do Atma Dhyana. Because what happens is I need to understand that Atma is Satya, but more than that, I need to understand that Anatma is Asatya. That has to be established more, because our intense attachment is there to Anatma. So once that slowly goes down, that is when Atma Satyatva, like once we start removing those cloths from the tube light, we'll start seeing the light of the tube anyways. So one technique, as we have discussed so many times, is FIR reduction. So that can be done. The next slide, we see that the next verse talks about Viparita Bhavana. We have been discussing. What is Viparita Bhavana? It is that I don't consider the real nature of something as that. Instead, I consider something opposite. For example, if I consider my father as my enemy, because he keeps telling me or he keeps scolding me, but he's the most well-wisher for me. So that is Viparita Bhavana, considering the most well-wisher as an enemy. So that way, we are also inflicted with this problem, because there are certain truths that we are not really convinced about, and we fall into misconceptions. So in the next slide, we see that the first truth that we have is that I am Atma. I am actually free from all Anatma. I am Asanga. I am not touched by any of that. And then the second truth is that this whole world is Mithya. And so if there is Mithya, then I really need not worry about that. And what Mithya doesn't mean it is an illusion or it is false. Mithya means that it is not as true as the original reality, or it is a dependent reality. It requires something else for its existence. So that in Vedanta is called Mithya. But what actually happens is we forget these truths and we get confused. And then I consider myself as Deha Adi Atma. I consider myself that broad body mind complex. And I say, okay, I, my body and my family, this is who I am. And then I consider rest of the things as the world. But in fact, I am different than this body, mind, family, and everything else. So that is one confusion. I consider this my ahankara also as myself. And then the second confusion is that I consider this world also as Satya. And once I consider that Mithya world as Satya, then all its problems also I start owning, and then I get worried by that. So these two problems are there. So we'll see in the next verses how we can solve these problems. But bottom line is, in every action, whatever we do, we need to make sure that we are dwelling on this teaching. And slowly and surely, we will ultimately have that dridhata in our. Thank you, sir. Hari Om.
Thank you very much, Ullas. This is one of the greatest verses of Tripti Deepa, a verse that needs to be in our minds, not only in our minds, that chintanam all the time. Let that thought be in your mind, that I am that. Whenever you speak to each other, see yourself as an actor playing a particular role. Do your role very sincerely, but don't take it seriously. Whenever you have an opportunity like this on satsang, enrich each other on this. Anyon tad prabodhanam. So this is the greatness. Now we need to pull each one along and have each one at the same level of understanding. There is no one going ahead or no one leaving anybody behind. We all work together as a team, that all of us have this understanding, Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya, and this is something that we need to remember. Brahma Abhyas, according to wise people, is this. Other than this, everything else is of a lower order, and therefore we should not give too much importance to. Dr. Rekha, please.
Hari Om, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. My verses will reiterate the brilliant teaching that has already been given, but we have learned that we benefit always from repetition. So there will be repetition in what I say. From the verses 97 to 134 or 135, Vidyaranya Swamiji has spoken about Smaranam, Mananam and Nididhyasanam with respect to obstacles, saying that all three are meant for Pratibandha Nivritti, which, as we have heard, is removal of obstacles between Jnana and Jnana Phala. We already know that the knowledge vritti arises during the Adhyayana Rupa Shravana itself. But it does not give us Jnana Phala because of these three obstacles which have been mentioned: Pramana Asambhavana, Prameya Asambhavana, and Viparita Bhavana. Now, so what gives us nivritti from these? Respectively, it is Vichara Rupa Shravana, which removes the intellectual doubts, Mananam, which removes the confusion about Jiva Jagat Ishvara, and Nididhyasanam, specifically with Viparita Bhavana, because we are mainly dealing with Viparita Bhavana, and this prevents the knowledge which we have already gained from actually being enjoyed by us in a Vyavaharika Jiva. So I need to release the obstacles. I don't have to work for any further for knowledge. Next slide, please. So Panchadashi Shloka 112, Tattva Bhavanaya Nashet, Sato Dehati Riktatam, Atmano Bhav Vayet Tadvan, Mithyatvam Jagato Nisham. So the literal translation is, the erroneous conviction is destroyed by meditation on the real entity. So anyone who aspires will meditate on the self as different from the body and also on the unreality of the world. So there are two things that need to be meditated on. Next slide, please. So again, we are dealing with Viparita Bhavana, which we have learned is habitual wrong thinking or misconception. It's also called Viparyaya. Misconception is two things. One is missing the real nature of a thing, and secondly, in its place, superimposing something which is really not there. For example, we will use the rope snake because it is such a useful example to use. One we can take as the Atma-centered wrong notion, where we miss the ropeness. The ropeness is the original nature of the rope, but we miss that when we entertain the Anatma-centered wrong notion, which is we perceive a snake when there is no snake. So this can be considered as the two categories. Dehadi Atmatvam, where we feel the body, the mind and sense organs to be the real me. And the second is Jagat Satyatva, thinking the world. And this world includes the body-mind complex Ahankara. It includes my family who are so close to me. And of course, everything else in the world, which is very easy to say is not me, but or is maybe unreal, but we think all of that is absolutely real. Swamiji tells us these are adhyasa and they are obstacles to the firmness of knowledge. So in verse 112, Vidyaranya defines Nididhyasana as a deliberate negation, nashet, of the twofold Viparita Bhavana, which he says sa, by entertaining counter thoughts. So that is Tattva Bhavana, or it is actually Nididhyasanam. So what do I have to do? I have to deliberately say that I am not any one of them. All of us know in our Vyavaharika world, we are very prone to worry, we feel insecure, we fear so many things. And Swamiji says we are experts in that. And this is a samsara thought pattern, and it is from previous births, it is there in our subconscious mind. But we have to remove that and replace it with I am free, the thought that I am free. I have learned so much, but I have to make this feeling mine. Another way of explaining this is that in the morning we have a darkened room. There is a window through which bright light is coming, but we have a dark blind that covers it. So all I have to do is remove the blind, and then the bright light from the window just comes rushing in. So similarly, the obstacle or the blind, removal of the blind is going to make the knowledge that is already there just shine through. So again, dealing with the Dehadi Atmatvam, Vedantic thinking says, I am not the body representing Stula, Sukshma and Karana Chariras, but I have to reinforce this thought and get the conviction that I am not the body. This is not easy, but I have to meditate upon this thought. Now, Videha Mukti is something that usually is an important thought. And after the exhaustion of Prarabdha, a seeker before coming to Vedanta looks forward to that. But those of us who have come a little, who have a little more knowledge, it should not apply to us. So after coming to Vedanta, I should not be obsessed with a particular Sukshma Sharira. So I know that the rope is not a snake, but yet I say I don't want to touch it because it might bite me. So there is still an element of, lack of knowledge. Next slide, please. So the second thing is Jagan Mityatva, where the unreality of the world should be reinforced. And when I say that the world is unreal, I should include my family, my body, mind, and meditate upon the unreality of the universe. Swami Paramarthanandaji keeps telling us that this word Mithya has no English substitute, and we should just use the word Mithya. It is actually a relative unreality, which is difficult to comprehend. Next slide, please. The next verse, 113, is a question that is posed by the Purva Pakshi. Kim mantra japavan murti dhyana vachat bhedadhi jagan mithyatva dhishchatra vyavartya syadu tanyatha. So the question is, are these ideas of difference of the self from the body and the unreality of the world, these two thoughts, are they to be repeated ad nauseum, like the recitation of a holy formula, like a mantra japa, or the meditation in the form of a deity, murti dhyana, or by some other method? Next slide, please. So here Vidyaranya enters into an important discussion. Does one have to repeatedly, mentally repeat Aham Brahmasmi thought, as is done in the case of mantra japa and saguna upasana? Should nididhyasana also be done in this manner, is the question. So is this absolutely necessary, or is this rule relaxable? Next slide, please. So in the next slide, we again go over the two kinds of nididhyasana. The first is the Samadhi Abhyasa Rupa Nididhyasana, which has been already described in the Bhagavad Gita, Mandukya, in the first chapter, Pancadashi, where we follow Desha, Kala, Asana. We follow many rules and regulations. We sit in a particular way. We face a particular direction. Ashtanga Yoga steps of Dharana, Dhyana, and Samadhi. We mind all the rules. And we learn that this kind of Samadhi Abhyasa Rupa Nididhyasana is not really compulsory for Viparita Bhavana Nivritti. It can be done, but it's not compulsory. The second form is the one which we focus on, the Brahmabhyasa Rupa Nididhyasana, which is defined and explained so well in the Shloka 106. It tells us to dwell on the Vedantic teaching alone, and the reason is not to have any extraordinary experience. And because of that, the posture, how we sit, what we say, all that is not important. So this can take the form of repeated Shravana, in the form of listening, writing notes, in the form of discussing with each other, in taking on the role of teachers, as we are doing in the present experience. So Brahmabhyasa is experienceable removal of habitual patterns of thinking, or reduction of FIR, the frequency, intensity, and recovery should come down in whatever samsaric experience I have. So what is relevant is that always the mind should be fixed on the teaching, I am ever free. And in this chapter, Vidyaranya Swamiji focuses on Brahmabhyasa, Rupa Nidhi Dhyasana. Next slide. I think this is my last slide. So the answer to this question will be provided by the next speaker, Dr. Ashwini. Thank you. Hari Om.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rekha, for a very clear explanation of these two verses. What is that we need to take back? Nowhere else in our teachings have we seen so much of an emphasis on give less importance to the anatma and meditate on that as mithya. That is the first learning to be done. Second is, should we take this as a form of meditation, Shivoham, Shivoham, Shivaswarupam, just like we say Om Namah Shivaya? The teacher says, certainly not. This is not for repetition. It is for understanding. Pujya Swamiji repeatedly says, clear understanding of Mahavakya and clear understanding is all that you require. And let that be our sadhana. Dr. Ashwini, please.
Thank you, sir. Hari Om. As a reply to the verse 113, the 114 goes like this. Next slide. Anyatheti vihanihi trishtartatvena bhuktivat bubukshur japavat bhungte nakaschin kwachitam. As a reply, no, it is different because the result is immediately enjoyed, like a hungry man enjoys eating. Unlike the repetition of mantras, there is no injunction. A person who feels hungry eats as he likes. He is only interested in eliminating his hunger and does not care for social graces or diet restrictions. The satisfaction he gains by eating is palpable. Similarly, the one who seeks to eliminate the false notions need not follow any rules or regulations. The rules are followed meticulously when we practice upasana, since it produces adrishta punya. Whereas nididhyasana is aimed at, as everybody spoke, at removal of the obstacles, and it is drishtapala. Therefore, asana is of minimal importance while practicing nididhyasana. One has to follow some rituals using mantra japa to gain punyam or adrishtapala, which is an invisible one. This is supposed to be the karmakanda rule. Swamiji differentiates upasana and nididhyasana and elaborates on Brahma Abhyasi Rupa Nididhyasanam, which is to dwell on Vedantic teachings without bothering about posture, etc. It can only happen by repeated shravanam, sharing knowledge, teaching to others, and also removing certain habits which are obstacles in our path of Vedantic learning. Hence, nididhyasanam is to release obstacles or obstacles suppressing knowledge, which comes with no condition. Next slide, sir. In the verses 115, 116, Vidyaranya discusses nididhyasanam as a means of removing the viparita bhavana pratibandha, which has to be removed for getting the benefit of knowledge. Though upasana and nididhyasanam happens to be a mental activity where focusing is common in both, Vidyaranya differentiates upasana as adrushta prayojana, which comes with japa and Vedic rituals. The rules here has to be implicitly followed without questioning. Shastra does not give any scientific reason here. Swami Paramarthanandaji explains this using the Tarpana Riti Vidhi, where we follow Deva Tarpana, Rishi Tarpana, and Pitru Tarpana. Here, the position of hand varies in all the three. The pouring of water happens sometimes from front, side, and through middle of two palms. Swamiji says the whole Karma Kanda is based on the faith in the Vedic statement. So it's only about rules, whether it is ritual japa or upasana. In fact, Vidyaranya frightens, saying that results may be counterproductive if japas are not properly chanted with swaras and varnas in place. Vidyaranya says, do all the japas and nitya naimittika karmas only for chitta shuddhi and offer all that at the feet of the Lord. This is upasana. In case of nididhyasanam, these problems does not exist at all. It is meant for changing mental orientation, FIR reduction, which is experienceable here and now. Whether the mental reaction comes down or not, at least one can watch his or her own mind, the thoughts, and get the benefit through nididhyasanam here and now. Next slide, sir. Verse 117 talks more elaborately on nididhyasanam, which goes like this. Kshudheva drishta badha krida viparita cha bhavana jeya kena pyupayena nastyatra kramaha. Dehatma bhavana, which is opposite of Brahmatma bhavana, causes drishta badha, mental disturbance. The greater deha abhimana, I, becomes an individual in world. Ahankara and mamakara comes in. Family abhimana comes in. And in fact, deha abhimana and family abhimana are like two sides of the same coin. It's never free from problems. So it will always disturb the mind, which can be directly experienced, similar to hunger. Kshudeva here means hunger, which is a drishta problem, which can be seen. Removal, which is otherwise called FIR reduction, come under drishta prayojana only. No punya or papa involved here, hence no shastric rules also involved. One has to be victorious over our own mental problems called viparita bhavana. It has to be managed, restrained, controlled, handled, and made insignificant. Only nididhyasanam can be practiced to win over these. Of course, again, there are two types of nididhyasanam, samadhi abhyasa rupa, brahma abhyasa rupa, where anything can be chosen. Samadhi is presented as a compulsory state every seeker should have to go through. In this verse, Vidyaranya says it is not compulsory. Not that he is against, but also states it is one of the few methods of practicing nididhyasanam besides repeated shravanam, teaching, writing, or discussing. The important point that Vidyaranya makes here is to dwell upon the teachings of Vedanta, and there are absolutely no rules at all with regard to the practice of nididhyasanam. Summarizing this verse, erroneous notion is like hunger, as it too causes visible disturbance. It should be conquered by any means possible. Here, there is no sequence or rules to be followed. Hari Om, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ashwini, for another clear explanation of these two verses, where there is a nice description by Swami Vidyaranya about the distinction between nididhyasanam and upasana. And now that we have certain eligibility, let the focus be on nididhyasanam. Nididhyasanam is also about two types. One is samadhi form and the other is Brahma Abhyasa. And again, he gives a greater importance to Brahma Abhyasa. What is that? Tat Chintanam, Tat Katanam, Anyon, Tat Prabodhanam. We come to the last presentation of Tripti Deepa by Dr. Satyanarayana. Dr. Satyanarayana, please.
Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Verse 124 goes like this. Krishi Vanijya Sevadau Kavya Tarkadikeshu Cha vikshipate pravattadhi tai tattva smratya asambhavat. Going by the word meaning, Krishi Vanijya Sevadav, that is agriculture, business, and employment. Kavya Tarkadi Keshu, in the sense in poetry and the science of logic. Cha is and. Vikshipyate is distracted. Pravatta is by engagement. Dhi is mind. Tai with these. Tattva smratya asambhavat, due to impossibility of remembering the truth. Means the verse meaning goes, the mind is distracted by engagement in agriculture, business, employment, and also poetry and science of logic, etc. due to the impossibility of remembering the truth with these. Vidyaranya has discussed the topic Shravana and Manana and is here discussing Nididhyasana. Nididhyasana is meant for Viparita Bhavana Nivrutti or Dehatma Vasana Nivrutti. It is not meant for either knowledge or conviction, but it is meant to set this knowledge into our subconscious mind. Even after the conscious mind is convinced in our hearts, still because of the long-formed habit or vasana, the inner mind continues to have powerful ahankara and mamakara. The Dehabhimana is called Ahankara and the family Abhimana is called Mamakara, as we have seen in previous verses. Both Ahankara and Mamakara are anti-Vedantic thought processes. From the standpoint of Vedanta, I am not body at all, but I am Atma. And from Atma standpoint, I can never claim anything as mine because Atma does not have relationship with anything in the creation. This Aham Mama remains in subconscious mind all the time and this will cause its own subconscious worries. Therefore, at the conscious level, I am Ananda Swarupa will be repeated, but the subconscious level continues to worry about either me or my family. That means Jnana is only at superficial level and I have not pushed it to subconscious level. This pushing process is called as Nididhyasana. Swamiji tells about port here. Any Vyavahara, next slide, any Vyavahara or worldly transaction may distract the mind from essential teaching. And that is why Swamiji says during Nididhyasana, try to reduce port, that is preoccupation, obligation, relationship, and transaction with the material world. They make the mind preoccupied. The advice given here is for full-time seekers who want nothing but the truth and who wish to liberate themselves from the cycle of birth and death here and now for Jivana Mukti. Few examples are given in this verse. Next slide. Agriculture, business, service, literature, novel, all of them are addictive to the mind. They are unconducive to Brahma Bhyasa, as it only strengthens the false notion that I am the body and the world is real. We should know how and where to draw the line, and we should go through them only to such an extent to make the Vedanta understandable. We should not go farther than that. Such individuals who engage themselves in such activity lose the remembrance of main goal of the contemplation. For them, the secondary thing becomes primary and the primary becomes secondary. The study of Vedas, on the other hand, will not lead to such forgetfulness regarding the truth itself. Here, Vidyaranya says, this Nididhyasana process should go along with appropriate Pathya. Next slide. Always, Pathya and Aushadha should go together. It should go with a conducive lifestyle or Vyavahara. What type of Vyavahara is conducive? Vidyananya says, Tattva Smaraka Vyavahara. Any type of activity which will keep you within the fold of Vedantic thinking, and that is harmless. Trying to reduce the Vyavahara. We can never make it zero, after all being a part of society, but may you filter the Vyavahara carefully. And where to draw the line? Each one is to decide according to one's own situation of life. Vidyaranya gives a general set of guidelines. You cannot avoid eating Vyavahara. While eating, it is indeed possible to engage in the continuance of meditation because there is no extreme disturbance and it can quickly be remembered again if it is forgotten. Next verse, 126, goes like this. Tattva smriti matrana anarth kintu viparyayat viparyetum nakalasti jatit smaratah kvachit. Going by the word meaning, tattva smriti matra, due to forgetting of the truth momentarily, na is no, anarth is calamity, but kintu is but, viparyayat, due to erroneous conviction, viparyetam, to get confused, na kal, no time, asti jatit, is immediately, smarataha, being recollected, and kvachit is here. Means the whole verse meaning is there is calamity due to erroneous conviction about the truth, but not due to forgetting of the truth momentarily. Since there is no time to get confused here because of immediate recollection. In this verse, Vidyaranya said, even if you forget Vedanta, it does not matter. Advaita Nivritti will not matter much. It is Dvaita projection or Viparita Bhavana projection that is taken as real, and that is an issue here. What creates problem is a thought pattern which is opposite to Vedanta, like rope ignorance will not be a problem. What creates the problem is this snake perception. Therefore, he says, by mere forgetfulness of tattva, the reality there will be no problem. The problems are caused by opposite thought pattern. The forgetfulness of aham brahmasmi is replaced by aham devosmi, aham manasmi. Then brahmatma bhavana being forgotten is no problem, but when it is replaced by dehatma bhavana, it is the problem. It is called as ahankara. In the case of a a person who limits vyavahara, the worldly transaction, even if aham mama adhyasa becomes, he will quickly regain the memory before he gets lost too much. Therefore, don't get too submerged in dvaita vyavahara. He gives a warning. Therefore, you may be alert in your worldly vyavahara. A person who immediately recollects the teaching is a wise man, and there is not enough time for samsara to come into a wise man. Is it possible for us to strike a balance between our spiritual and worldly life? Let us see this in upcoming verses. Hari Om.
Thank you very much, Dr. Satyanarayana. Two important take-home messages is that if you have to be in the spiritual path, we have to work on port. Possessions, obligations, relations, and transactions. Because if you get too involved in worldly activity, then we have missed this opportunity. And finally, this is another verse which is very important. Between Brahma Satyam and Jagan Mithya, if you forget Brahma Satyam momentarily, no problem. But it is giving importance to the world, being identified with the body, which is the greater danger. And that is what Vidyaranya Swami is emphasizing on these words. We'll conclude today's class by Dr. Ashwini, please.
Thank you, sir. This is my favorite Gita verse. This is second chapter, verse number 7. It goes like this. Karpanya dosho pahat svabhavaha pruchhami tvam dharma sammudha chetaha yacheyasyan nishchitam bruhi tanme shishyasteham shadhimam tvam prapannam. This happens to be a pivotal verse that results in Gitopadesha. Next slide, sir. Karpanya dosho upahat svabhavaha. Svabhavaha here is mind, and that mind is upahata, non-functional or incapacitated. The basic function of mind is vivekaha, discriminating between two things. This is a moment where Arjuna has to choose the right course. Since his mind is clouded by raga, the attachment, Moha, the delusion, it is upahata, obstructed or scrambled. And the obstruction is because of karpanyam, helplessness or confusion. The confusion is regarding dharma. Dharma Shastra clearly says himsa is a papam. One should not harm anyone physically, verbally, or even mentally. But since Duryodhanas are embodiment of adharma, unfortunately, Acharyas and Bhishma Pitamaha have joined adharmic side. Arjuna knows that he has to fight them, but is unable to. Therefore, aham pritchami, I am asking you, yet shreyasyat nishchitam bruhi. Please tell me what is definitely good for me. What is the right action that I have to do? In the next slide, oh Lord, not only that, aham te shishyaha. Next slide, sir. I am your disciple. Shishyaha is the one who is a fit receptacle for teaching. This verse becomes a crucial turning point where Arjuna, the soldier, becomes Arjuna, the disciple. Now, what determines Shishya Yogyata is having an open mind without any prejudice. With this open-mindedness, Arjuna surrenders to Krishna. Tvam prapanna, seeking shadi, knowledge, by which the ignorance can be removed. Thus, Krishna becomes a Gitacharya. Prior to this verse, Krishna was strongly advising Arjuna, but now turns into a helping guru for Arjuna and all of us. Next slide, sir. Before the actual Gita teaching starts, Arjuna goes through certain phases, which we all can identify with as well. The first one is samsara, identifying with the suffering and realizing that the material world does not give lasting happiness and security. Next is viparyaya, longing to solve the recognized problems. Next one is samshaya, doubting their ability to solve the problems by themselves. Karpanyam, which brings the feeling of helplessness about this inability to solve their problems. The last one is prapannam or sharanagatihi, surrendering to a suitable guide or a guru seeking help. Now the stage is set for Gitopadesha, which is a moksha shastra. This verse happens to be important in identifying the problem. Only once we identify the problem inside, we try to seek the help. And hence, this is my favorite. Let us be all as sincere as Arjuna. Hari Om. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Hegde. Thank you to the team. And our salutations to Swami Vidyaranya. Just like everything reminds a lover of his beloved, similarly, everything we do must trigger the thought that I am Purna, Anantam, Anandam. For a seeker, replacing all our old habitual tendencies. Tat chintanam, tat kathanam, anyonam, tat prabodhanam. Continuously contemplate, speak, listen, read, write, share, discuss all these teachings, and alert living without losing sight or missing a chance to be a siddha. Totally immersed, stop behaving any otherwise, giving less and less importance to the mithya problems and the mithya world. We meet for the next session, session 10 on September 11th. Thank you to all the listeners. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om.